When Jake Paul stepped on that scale and stared down a man who towers 5 inches above him and outweighs him by 27 pounds, something shifted in his eyes that nobody expected. The heated exchange that followed revealed cracks in the confidence of both fighters, but what happened behind closed doors during training camp tells a completely different story. A story involving broken noses, black eyes, and a sparring partner who just changed everything we thought we knew about this fight. The boxing world went absolutely berserk when this matchup was officially announced. Jake Paul, the YouTuber who started his career knocking out fellow internet personalities, suddenly finds himself locked in a contract to face Anthony Joshua, a former two-time unified heavyweight world champion with an Olympic gold medal hanging on his wall and 25 knockout victories stamped on his record. This isn't some washed-up fighter past his prime or an MMA legend testing boxing waters. This is arguably the biggest, most dangerous opponent Paul has ever faced, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Joshua stands at 6'6" with an 82-inch reach, looking like he was carved from granite. Paul, he's 6'1", fighting at cruiserweight for most of his career, now stepping up to challenge a legitimate heavyweight monster. But here's where things get interesting. The contract includes a bizarre clause that Joshua cannot weigh more than 245 pounds at the official weigh-in. Why would they need that clause? Because without it, Joshua could have easily walked into that ring at 260 or 270 pounds or more, turning this from a boxing match into something that resembles a legal street fight.
The weigh-in itself became a spectacle that had fans buzzing across social media. Joshua stepped on the scale at 243.4 pounds, just under the limit, looking calm and collected. He gave a casual thumbs up, cracked a joke about finally being able to eat, and carried himself like a man who's done this 1,000 times before. Paul weighed in at 216.6 pounds, screaming at the crowd that he was dialed in, flexing his muscles, putting on a show for the cameras. But when the two fighters came face to face, the tension exploded. Joshua leaned in close and delivered a chilling warning that sent shockwaves through the arena. He told Paul straight up that he's a serious fighter and Paul is going to get messed up badly. Standing next to his promoter, Eddie Hearn, Joshua made an even bolder statement, claiming that Hearn helped Paul have his pro debut, and now he's brought Joshua in to end Paul's boxing career entirely. Paul fired back, claiming he could smell fear, insisting the pressure is entirely on Joshua and that he's fighting free because he's already won just by making this fight happen. The back and forth was intense, personal, and revealed something crucial. Both men are feeling the weight of what this fight means for their legacies. But the real bombshell came from Paul's training camp in Puerto Rico, and it's something that has boxing experts completely reevaluating their predictions. Paul didn't just bring in any sparring partners. He recruited world champion heavyweights, legitimate killers in the ring who were preparing for their own championship fights. Lawrence Okolie, the former world cruiserweight and bridgerweight champion, who now competes at heavyweight, was brought in specifically to give Paul a taste of what facing a giant British fighter would feel like. Okolie stands 6'6" and weighs 270 pounds, essentially a bigger, fresher version of Joshua. The sparring sessions were so intense that Okolie gave Paul a nasty black eye that was visible on camera when Paul gave streamers Aiden Ross and N3on a tour of his training facility. Paul admitted it himself, pointing to the bruising under his right eye and crediting Okolie for the damage. But that's not all. Paul also revealed that his nose, which had been broken previously, got even more crooked during these brutal sparring sessions. He's taking punishment from guys who are bigger, heavier, and more dangerous than most fighters would ever willingly spar with.
Now here's where this story takes an unexpected turn. Okolie, who initially was skeptical about Paul's chances and probably expected to absolutely dominate him in sparring, came away from those sessions with a completely different opinion. According to Okolie himself in interviews, he went into the first day of sparring asking Paul's coaches how hard he should go, essentially preparing to take it easy on the YouTube star. But Paul told him to bring everything he had, to go as hard as he wanted, to treat it like a real fight. Okolie obliged, and what he discovered shocked him. He gave Paul between 9 and 10 rounds of intense, high-level sparring, and while he admits Paul isn't a true heavyweight in terms of power, he was genuinely impressed by Paul's speed, tenacity, and technical improvements. Okolie described Paul as punching like a very fast, very good cruiserweight, someone who could absolutely hurt a heavyweight if he lands clean shots. The former world champion even admitted that while he doesn't think Paul knocking out Joshua is the most likely outcome, it's absolutely within the realm of possibility. That's a massive statement coming from someone in Joshua's own camp, a fellow British fighter who has sparred with the best in the division. Paul also brought in Frank Sanchez and Jared Anderson, two more elite heavyweight contenders who are ranked among the best in the world. These aren't guys looking for an easy payday. They came to Puerto Rico to push Paul to his absolute limits, and according to Paul's coaches, the sparring he endured was harder than the actual fight will be. That's either supreme confidence or a calculated attempt to get into Joshua's head, but either way, it shows Paul is taking this more seriously than any fight in his career. He's locked himself away for months, living and breathing boxing, working with world-class trainers, and putting his body through absolute war in preparation. His coaches have publicly stated they believe the work Paul has done in the gym with these heavyweight monsters will make the actual fight feel easier by comparison. That's a bold claim, but it's backed up by visible evidence of the punishment Paul has absorbed and survived. Meanwhile, Joshua returned to the ring after taking time off following his devastating knockout loss to Daniel Dubois. That fight ended with Joshua flat on his back, his dreams of reclaiming a world title shattered in brutal fashion. For a fighter of his caliber, taking a fight against Jake Paul was supposed to be a tune-up, a confidence builder, an easy payday before moving on to bigger things, like a potential mega fight with Tyson Fury. Eddie Hearn, Joshua's longtime promoter, openly admitted they took this fight because the money was too good to refuse, and they believed it would be straightforward. He literally said in a BBC column that no boxer in their right mind would have turned down this opportunity, and anyone claiming otherwise is lying through their teeth. But as the fight approached, the narrative started shifting. Joshua, who had been relatively respectful in the early promotional stages, suddenly started making ominous threats. He doubled down on claims that he might seriously hurt Paul, talking about taking his soul in the ring, not just beating him physically, but destroying him mentally and spiritually. The tension reached its peak during the final press conferences, when Joshua's demeanor completely changed. Gone was the calm, collected champion who had been dismissing Paul as just another opponent. Instead, we saw a fighter who seemed genuinely irritated, almost angry at the disrespect he felt from having to share the ring with someone he views as beneath him. Joshua talked about Francis Ngannou, the former UFC heavyweight champion who crossed over to boxing and got absolutely demolished by Joshua in under 2 rounds. Ngannou is a legitimate knockout artist who had given Tyson Fury problems in their fight, but Joshua made him look like an amateur. The message was clear. If Joshua could do that to Ngannou, what chance does Paul really have? The size difference alone is staggering. When they stood next to each other at the weigh-in, Paul's eye level barely reached Joshua's chest. The visual was jarring, almost uncomfortable to watch, because it really drives home just how physically outmatched Paul appears to be.
But Paul thrives on being the underdog. His entire boxing career has been built on people doubting him, mocking him, claiming he's a fraud who only fights carefully selected opponents. He's heard it all before. When he started, critics said he could only beat other YouTubers. Then when he knocked out former NBA player Nate Robinson, they said he could only beat non-boxers. When he defeated former UFC fighters like Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva, and Nate Diaz, the narrative shifted to him only fighting washed-up MMA guys past their prime. When he beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., critics pointed out Chavez was a shell of his former self, and when Paul went the distance with Mike Tyson, detractors focused on Tyson being 58 years old, rather than acknowledging Paul's performance. Now, with Anthony Joshua standing in front of him, Paul finally has the chance to silence every single doubter with one performance.
If he wins, if he somehow pulls off what would be considered one of the biggest upsets in boxing history, nobody can ever question his legitimacy again. The odds tell the story of how one-sided this fight is supposed to be. Joshua opened as a 12-1 favorite, meaning betting markets believe Paul has less than an 8% chance of winning. That's not just being the underdog, that's being written off entirely. Boxing experts, former champions, and analysts across the board are predicting Joshua will knock Paul out early, possibly in the first round. Tyson Fury, Joshua's longtime rival and former unified heavyweight champion, publicly stated he'd bet £1 million on Paul, which seems like trolling more than a genuine prediction given their history. Frank Warren, a prominent boxing promoter, called the fight a potential car crash, suggesting it might not go the way anyone expects and could end badly. Donald McRae from The Guardian labeled it a circus fight and expressed hope that Paul won't need to be carried out in an ambulance. The criticism hasn't just been about the skill mismatch. Many in the boxing community are genuinely concerned about Paul's safety, questioning whether this fight should have even been sanctioned.
But Paul's confidence remains unshaken. He claims he's studied Joshua's recent fights and sees vulnerabilities that others don't. He points to Joshua getting caught and knocked out by Andy Ruiz Jr., a massive underdog, proving that Joshua can be hurt and stopped. He references Joshua's back-to-back losses to Alexander Usyk, fights where Joshua looked slower, less sharp, more hittable than in his prime. Paul believes Joshua is past his peak, that the years of wars in the ring have taken their toll, and that his own speed and movement will be enough to frustrate the bigger man. He's convinced that Joshua won't be able to line up clean power shots because Paul will be moving constantly, making him miss, tiring him out, and then capitalizing when Joshua gets frustrated and sloppy. Paul's coaches have echoed this sentiment, saying their game plan is built around making Joshua chase him around the ring, exhausting the older, heavier fighter, and then attacking in the later rounds when Joshua's gas tank is empty. The fight is set for 8 3-minute rounds with 10-ounce gloves, standard heavyweight rules, despite Paul primarily fighting at cruiserweight. The ring size is 22 feet by 22 feet, slightly larger than the standard 20-foot ring, which theoretically gives Paul more space to move and circle. Every detail has been negotiated, analyzed, and strategized. This isn't a sparring session or an exhibition. This is a fully sanctioned professional heavyweight bout where knockouts are not only allowed, but expected. The entire event is streaming live on Netflix, making it accessible to a massive global audience with no pay-per-view fee required. Netflix bet big on Paul after his fight with Mike Tyson broke streaming records despite controversy over Tyson's age. Now they're doubling down with an even bigger, more dangerous matchup that has the potential to be either a spectacular upset or a brutal reality check for Paul.
Beyond the fight itself, the implications for both fighters' futures hang in the balance. For Joshua, this was supposed to be a stepping stone, a high-profile showcase fight to remind the world he's still a force before pursuing bigger challenges like Fury or a rematch with Dubois or another shot at unified champion Alexander Usyk. But if he loses to Jake Paul, if the unthinkable happens and Paul catches him with a lucky punch or outboxes him over 8 rounds, Joshua's legacy takes a catastrophic hit. Everything he's accomplished, the Olympic gold, the world titles, the stadium fights in front of 90,000 fans, all of it gets overshadowed by losing to a YouTuber. Eddie Hearn acknowledged this, saying a loss would be devastating, but insisting it won't happen. For Paul, the upside is limitless. A win over Joshua catapults him into legitimate world title contention. He's already been added to the WBA cruiserweight rankings despite never fighting for a belt in that division, showing that sanctioning bodies are taking him seriously. A victory here could lead to actual championship opportunities, fights with the best in the world, and vindication for every sacrifice he's made over the past 5 years. The broader boxing community remains deeply divided. Purists hate everything this fight represents, viewing it as a mockery of a sport with rich history and tradition. They see Paul as an interloper, a promoter who uses his fame and platform to manufacture opportunities that real boxers grind their entire lives to achieve. They point to his record, 12 wins and 1 loss, with most victories coming against opponents who aren't pure boxers. His only defeat came against Tommy Fury, the brother of Tyson Fury, and an actual professional boxer with a family lineage in the sport. That loss was competitive but clear, showing Paul's limitations when facing someone his own size with proper boxing fundamentals. But others argue Paul deserves credit for constantly challenging himself, for putting in the work, for taking this fight when he could have easily chosen safer opponents for bigger money. He didn't have to fight Anthony Joshua. He could have faced another aging MMA fighter or a boxer ranked outside the top 50. Instead, he called out one of the most dangerous heavyweights on the planet and made it happen.
As fight night approaches, the intensity keeps building. Social media is flooded with predictions, memes, and heated debates. Fans are genuinely split between those who believe Joshua will destroy Paul in under 3 rounds and those who think Paul's speed, youth, and hunger could shock the world. Training footage shows both fighters looking sharp, powerful, and ready. Joshua's power has never been in question. He's known for devastating one-punch knockout ability that has ended fights in spectacular fashion throughout his career. Paul's conditioning and technical improvements are visible in every video his team releases. The stage is set for either a coronation or an upset that will be talked about for decades. The undercard is stacked with multiple world title fights, including Alicia Baumgardner defending her unified super featherweight belt and Sherneka Johnson putting her undisputed bantamweight championship on the line. But everyone knows the main attraction is Jake Paul versus Joshua. This fight represents more than just 2 men stepping into a ring. It's a collision of old boxing versus new boxing, traditional pathways versus social media stardom, purist values versus entertainment-first mentality. Regardless of the outcome, the sport will never be quite the same. Jake Paul has forced the boxing establishment to pay attention, to adapt, to acknowledge that the landscape is changing whether they like it or not. His ability to generate massive viewership numbers, to sell out arenas, to create genuine buzz around his fights has proven that star power and promotion matter just as much as pure boxing skill in the modern era. Meanwhile, Anthony Joshua represents the last generation of fighters who climbed the traditional ladder, winning amateur tournaments, claiming Olympic glory, and methodically building their professional careers fight by fight. The clash between these 2 worlds happens live, in front of millions of viewers, with real consequences and real danger. When the bell rings and the action begins, all the talk, all the predictions, all the controversy fades away. What remains is 2 fighters, 1 ring, and a question that will finally get answered. Can Jake Paul really hang with an elite heavyweight champion, or will Anthony Joshua remind everyone why levels exist in boxing?